I almost watched my neighborhood go up in flames, and I'll tell you why. And how. And what it did to me. Because if you ever live anywhere with a homeowners association, this could be your street, your mailbox, your family in the car. It started the way a lot of calamities do, with a ribbon, a smile, and a photo op. 3 sentences in. There's your hook, people clap. A woman in pearls cuts a satin ribbon. And I stand under a brand new concrete arch thinking, that thing won't survive a season, much less a delivery truck. My name's Mason Whitfield. I'm the guy who used to ride the roads for the state bridges, overpasses, small municipal projects, 30 years of eyes on concrete. I measured things most folk take for granted. I knew, by feel and by habit, what a safe clearance was, and when somebody had cheapened the math. When I retired, I thought I was done with that part of my life. Turns out you can't really retire from watching for what will fall apart. Stonebrook Heights, that's where this happens. New cul-de-sac. Neat lawns. A gated sign with brass letters. And an HOA board that loved glossy pamphlets more than permits. They hired a local contractor. Lots of smiling renderings. Promises about community character and enhanced flow. The arch, they called it the Welcome Way, was supposed to be the centerpiece. Little flagstone. A path. A low tunnel for kids on scooters. Picturesque. Perfect for a brochure. Dangerous for anything with a wheelbase and a fuel tank. I showed up to the ribbon cutting because I'd lived in Stonebrook long enough to be nosy. And because my neighbor, Clara, dragged me along. She's the kind of person who organizes potlucks and then writes thank you notes afterward. She works 2 blocks away and still manages to know everyone's birthday. She'd asked me to come for moral support. And I always go to those things you never know when someone will need you to spot a crooked plaque. 3 steps from the arch, I did what I always did. I ducked my head and looked up. You do that when you've spent a lifetime telling city folks the clearances aren't right. The math. The rust stains. The unfinished rebar peeking like bad teeth. Little things that mean someone cut corners. I ducked. And I felt the air under the lip, and I thought, oh hell. I'm not a dramatic man. I don't like to make scenes. When you've worked on 100 projects and retired with a pension, you tend to prefer quiet. But when you see a hazard, you don't look the other way, you document. So I took out my phone and I measured with the old habit of it. Not trusting digital readouts to tell a story. But I used a tape too. Quick. Practiced. It came back low. Lower than the specs for even a small delivery truck. Not catastrophic by itself. Not yet. But enough that under the wrong circumstances, a wide tanker. A misread sign. A panicked driver, you had a very short window before things went sideways. I walked up to the HOA president. Her name wasn't on any public ballot that mattered, but around here, she was Queen Mirabelle Grayson. Mirabelle had that kind of smile that advertises a fundraiser, perfectly arranged teeth. Perfect posture. She wore the ribbon in a silk scarf. The pearls. A blazer with a pin that read Stonebrook Forward. Her voice was the kind that made people feel like idiots for interrupting a photo. I handed her a copy of my note, measured. Stamped. Precise. Beautiful work, she said, folding the paper into her clutch like it was a napkin. We appreciate your concern, Mr. Whitfield. Really? But we've cleared everything we need to. She named a contractor I'd never heard of, then smiled at a camera. She said words I later heard in press releases: safety first. Community input. Met all codes. Only they hadn't, at least not the codes I'd read in my job for 30 years. That evening I sent an email to the city inspector. CC the HOA board. Attached photos. The measurements. I didn't expect fireworks. I expected a reply like, thanks, Mr. Whitfield. We'll look into it. I didn't expect to get an angry letter back from the HOA's lawyer telling me to stop spreading misinformation that harms community cohesion, which is a polite way homeowners use to call you a troublemaker. You can tell a lot about a group by how quickly they threaten legal action instead of answering questions. What followed was the slow kind of pressure that becomes heavy, not one thunderclap, but persistent rain. Notices in the HOA newsletter about rogue posts. A handout at the gate warning people against unverified claims. A neighbor I liked, Tom. He ran the neighborhood watch and used to trade phishing stories with me. Stopped taking my calls. He'd smile around me, nod, and then turn his back. Small fractures. Mirabelle started a new Facebook group called Stonebrook Pride, where she posted staged photos of families and umbrellas in the arch and sunset light. Comments that supported me were deftly buried by dozens of replies from new profiles that had the same grammar and the same 3 smiling faces. I'm telling you this because when institutions avoid accountability, they don't always show the teeth right away. They cut off conversation. They gaslight. They pivot to image. They hope people get tired. They hope you do. But a clearance is a clearance, and it doesn't care about PR. Things escalated when they scheduled the first large commercial delivery for the underpass, a propane delivery. It was a contract the HOA had made with a landscaping company, and the schedule hung like a guillotine. Mirabelle insisted everything was in order. The newsletter explained that a weekly supply run would keep the community's gas fire pit stocked and ensure year-round ambience. They called it ambience. I called it risky. When you're tucking a tanker into a tunnel it wasn't made for. I knew the driver by sight, Ryan. Young, polite, new to the route. He'd trained on tight yard launches and narrow streets. And he was the kind of kid who'd apologize to a mailbox if he bumped it. The morning he pulled up, there was a nervous energy in the cul-de-sac. People came out to watch. Because if you live in an HOA, a delivery becomes theater. Mirabelle stood at the end of the arch, clipboard in hand, like a conductor. She waved Ryan forward with a smile. Just in. Just in. She called. Easy. Sweetheart. Easy now. You could hear the engine shift, the groan of metal. Ryan eased the tanker towards the opening like a dog coaxed into a small porch, tentative, hopeful. He had the look of someone doing his job well, and that is enough to make you trust him, until he doesn't make it. Halfway in, the tanker hit. Not hard, a small metallic screech, a sound that made every head turn, but it wedged. The metal scraped the concrete lip, throwing sparks like a bad movie, and then the rear wheels jammed against the bank. The tanker couldn't go forward. It couldn't go backward. It was the worst place to be stuck, a long cylinder of pressurized fuel trapped under an arch that had been built for postcards, not for industry. I remember the sound the driver made when he hit that lip, a soft curse. Then silence. He climbed down and looked up, and I could see in his face the realization that there's a difference between your training and the world's politics. And that difference can crush you. People pointed. Mirabelle's smile faltered. For a few seconds the air smelled like rubber and fear. When something like that happens, you feel time folding. In one beat. The scene is 1,000 small decisions. The contractor swore the signs were clear. The HOA board said they'd done their due diligence. Mirabelle stepped forward with a script. We'll handle it. Please stand back. The driver, Ryan, started to sweat. And then the first person who used instinct rather than talk was me. I'm a slow talker, but an honest mover. I walked to the tanker, and I said, open the valves. Shut it down. Get people away. The driver looked like he would do anything to keep the tanker intact. His hands trembled. He opened the emergency cut. We backed people away. Then something I hadn't counted on happened. A man stepped out from behind a hedge. Tall. Broad. An older guy with a military bearing that said he'd been mouthing orders for a living. He had a gun. He didn't fire it. He waved it. Carefully. The way someone waves a flag when they want attention. He had an HOA vest on. His name was Deacon Price. And he'd been hired as a security contractor by Mirabelle. Deacon pointed the gun at the group. And his voice was calm and flat. Nobody moves. He said. Back up and let the pros handle it. There's a kind of electric silence that happens when you mix fear and authority. Someone that you thought would protect you becomes the thing that compels you. The driver looked like he wanted to run. But the tanker was trapped. The kids on scooters had been ushered away by parents who suddenly remembered the urgency of breathing. A child's balloon floated past. The kind of mundane detail that makes everything else feel absurd. Mirabelle stepped in front of Deacon like a shield and said, "We have control. Everyone stay back." Her hands were steady. Her smile was gone. Somewhere between a smile and a rage, she had a different face, one that I've seen when people protect their reputation at all costs. She called the city the script and then started to give orders to Deacon. He kept his gun down, but it didn't leave anyone feeling safer. I stepped closer, and I said, quietly, "Call the fire department. Call hazmat. This is above our pay grade." She turned to me, and for a second, I saw something raw: irritation, annoyance, then a cold politeness. "Mr. Whitfield, please. This is handled." She had the phrase ready, like a rehearsed prayer. But people were afraid. A neighbor, Dennis, a retired contractor, had walked up too, and he leaned on a folding chair and said, "You can't have a pressurized tank jammed under low concrete. Someone gets hurt." That's when Deacon's gun came very slightly up, and a neighbor started to yell that we don't need threats. And Ryan, pale, sweating, dug his phone out and called his dispatcher. The dispatcher told him to stay put. The tanker sat like an animal ready to thrash. We were inches from disaster. We were loud, and then louder, and then a man in a reflective vest arrived, city inspector. Finally, because once someone points a gun, the bureaucracy moves faster than usual, and he had a clipboard and a life preserver and that small staccato way of assigning blame that municipal procedure gives you. He looked. He measured. And he said the words we'd all feared: "This is non-compliant. You're asking for a violation." Mirabelle tried to spin. "We followed our permits," she said. "This is a misunderstanding." Her voice cracked at the edges like varnish. Deacon kept his hand near the gun, but not on it. The driver was shaking. The city man radioed for a tow. For hazmat. For the noise control team. The event team. The whole municipal orchestra. The tanker was freed after an hour that stretched like taffy. Tow trucks and a crane. A set of straps. A lot of cursing. And then slowly the tanker slid free and backed away like a wounded animal. The cul-de-sac smelled like overheated brakes and panic. People hugged. Mirabelle came out on the steps of the arch. Hair flattened. The ribbons drooping. Her script had dissolved into a pile of bad choices. The story was already becoming a different thing than she'd planned. In the days that followed, Stonebrick divided. Those who'd been seduced by Mirabelle's pamphlets accused me of alarmism. Those who'd watched the tanker scrape concrete and heard the driver's voice break overnight asked questions. The Neighborhood Watch held an impromptu meeting. The local paper, a small weekly with ink stains on its masthead, ran a picture of the tanker with a headline that read like a courtroom: "Near miss at Welcome Way." The HOA issued a statement. All appropriate actions were taken. The city inspector issued a different line: "Unsafe construction practices identified, investigation ongoing." Now let me slow down and tell you the part that never shows up in Instagram photos: the toll on a single person. Mirabelle had a board and a PR firm and a bank account from New Dues. But I had a ledger of projects where people had died because someone had skipped a calculation. I was sleepwalking through my days, replaying every moment. Should I have done this? Said that? Called earlier? The mind finds ways to blame you for what the system hides. My wife Sarah would pat my hand at night and say, "You did the right thing, honey." But you know how people say that when they can't do anything else? It's a soft ballast. The investigation reached farther than the cul-de-sac. It unearthed a series of approvals that were rushed, contractors that subcontracted to subcontractors, and permits that were filed with missing pages. A retired engineer who liked to tinker in the evenings you meet them in small towns. The kind who save clippings and keep slide rules took an interest and produced a report that read like a smoking gun. The tunnel's measurement had a margin of error. Structural glazes were thinner than specified. And an independent review had never happened. When you dig into these things, You find motives not always sinister. Not always criminal, but patterns of expedience. Mirabelle had pushed the project because it increased property values. The contractor wanted the job profit. The board wanted the ribbon cut before a midterm meeting. People wanted decorations. And someone wanted to be someone. There were also uglier motives. In private messages that leaked, and who leaks these things but associates with grudges, Mirabelle had complained about a handful of homeowners who made things difficult. One of those homeowners was Clara, my neighbor who dragged me to the ceremony because she liked being part of the community. Clara had a boundary dispute with the HOA months before. She'd put up a small shed that a neighbor said violated the aesthetic. The HOA had slapped fines on her and then rescinded them in public. The leak suggested some animus. I read it, and I felt the room tilt. Sometimes the machinery of a small community is less about safety and more about settling scores. Mirabelle's defenders said the leak was forged, that I was dramatizing a handful of messages into a vendetta. Her supporters said she'd brought clean sidewalks and nice landscaping. The arch was a symbol, they said, of progress. That argument is the heart of so many things now. Progress versus prudence. Appearance versus integrity. The city held hearings. I testified. So did Ryan, the driver. Voice still raw. He said, plainly, that he trusted the signs and the people waving him in. He said he hadn't been trained for that kind of tight squeeze. The driver's words, "I thought I was doing the right thing," landed like a stone in a pond. People who'd called me alarmist sat in the hearing room and looked at the pictures and at the tape and lowered their heads. The HOA lawyer argued that this was an unforeseeable incident. Mirabelle sat in the gallery with a face like a billboard, blank and polished. During my testimony, I tried to be calm and precise. I explained the measurements, the codes, the margin of safety that builders and engineers respect. Because there's a difference between an attractive structure and an engineered structure. I felt my voice wobble at a few points. Memory grips you, and grief carries a sound. But honesty has a way of rubbing off on the rest of the room. The city issued a report that recommended rolling back the arch and requiring independent oversight for any further HOA infrastructure projects. Mirabelle resigned from the board before the final vote, and the press, always happiest with a face to hang a story on, made much of it. There were editors' columns about power in small communities and the dangers of unchecked leadership. Some wrote about heroism of the elderly inspector who refused to look away. Others wrote about witch hunts. The village was noisy with opinions. But let me tell you about the private things that followed. The stuff that doesn't make the front page. I got calls at night. At first they were passive-aggressive people telling me I'd ruined the community, that I should have kept quiet. Then the calls got darker, a voice that didn't say much except that it was a shame when people interfered. My mail showed up in the wrong box once, and a car idled outside my house at 2 a.m. Too many nights for comfort. It's a peculiar thing to have your life localized like that. Safety becomes a negotiation you didn't sign up for. Clara, she came to me with a jar of her lemon bars and a face that I'll never forget. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have pushed harder." She told me that after the hearing, neighbors who'd harassed her over the shed had come to apologize. Small people can be brave in private. That's the other half of community repair, not revenge. In the months that followed, the city tore down parts of the arch. They rebuilt the entrance with proper engineering oversight. It took longer. It cost more. And they planted more trees, perhaps to show that the neighborhood had been made whole. They added a small plaque at the base of the arch with tiny, respectful letters about safety and oversight. Mirabelle moved away. A handful of people still cheered her work. The contractor repaid certain fines and quietly left the municipal list of preferred vendors. The driver, Ryan, got a new route out of town. He texted me once from a truck stop full of fluorescent lights and said, "Thanks for saying something." I told him to keep his head down and mind his safety. People ask me, sometimes, if it was worth it. The question is the kind you ask a veteran after a war. The answer is never simple. Yes. We averted a potentially catastrophic event. Yes, we changed some rules so the next neighborhood might be safer. But we also lost friends. And that's the cost that doesn't come with a budget line. The transactional things, the hearings, the fines, the newspapers are easy to tally. The harder to quantify is how you sleep after you raise your voice and a block of neighbors turns away. There's another layer, the moral weather in communities like ours. Once a structure is up and a photo is taken, people begin to absorb an image of safety from that photograph. They don't always see the engineering. They see a family under an arch and assume everything is fine. Social media makes it worse. A picture circulates. People comment. Looks great. Few people dig into the plan sets. Few people ask for independent review. So sometimes the easiest choice to accept beauty, to applaud progress, becomes the wrong one. I learned something about myself through this. I learned that my muscle memory for safety is a kind of stubbornness that will not be consoled by polite adulation. I learned that doing the right thing is often lonely until it isn't. And I learned that the phrase community spirit can be weaponized by those who prefer unity to truth. There's a difference between community and conformity. The former holds people up. The latter snaps people into place. At the final public meeting, Mirabelle didn't come. She sent a letter, the tone measured, the words carefully chosen. She wrote about lessons learned, unintended consequences, and moving forward. In the audience were families who'd been there for potlucks and parents who'd come with kids who loved to ride scooters through the arch. They held signs, some that said, in big permanent marker, safety first. Others were less kind. There were tears. There were hugs. There were conversations that started with apologies and then moved into planning community oversight. After it was all done, or what passes for done in a small town, I found myself walking under the rebuilt arch at dusk. The new concrete had a clean smell like a new book. Kids zipped by on bikes. Someone had planted lavender along the path. The plaque was small but deliberate, built with oversight. For the safety of all. I ran my fingers over the letters. It felt, I don't know, unfinished in a good way. Like a sentence that invites a reader to continue. One thing I want you to take away from this, if you live near an HOA or sit on a volunteer board, or just enjoy a pretty view, is that aesthetics are not the same as engineering. Always ask for the plans. Ask for independent oversight when community money is spent. If something feels off, documentation helps more than anger. Call inspectors early. Don't let a ribbon cut determine your safety regime. And when you see someone, an old inspector with a way of measuring that looks like gentle nagging, listen. Ask questions. Not because you want to make enemies, but because you want to keep your friends. If you're watching this and you've had something similar happen in your neighborhood, tell me in the comments. Tell me what happened, how it made you feel, and if you stood up or stayed quiet. If you're on a board, tell me how you weigh beauty and safety, because that's a conversation we should all be having. If you like this story, share it with someone who lives in a small community. It's the kind of place where one voice can make a difference. I won't pretend it was glorious. I won't pretend it was easy. But I will say this, the sound of a community listening to a good argument is louder than the noise of pamphlets and polished smiles. If one person speaks up and others follow, not because they're told to, but because they see the math, then maybe we make a little less room for accidents that could have been prevented. So, what do you think? Was I right to push? Was I meddling? Where do we draw the line between caring and control? Drop your city in the comments. Tell us your story. Who was right? Who was wrong? And how did your neighborhood heal? Share this if you think safety is worth the awkward conversation. And whatever you do this week, measure twice and cut once, or better yet, don't cut at all without a second set of eyes.